Hi, everyone, and welcome to God's Plan, Your Part, a podcast where our goal is to read the entire Bible in a year, seeking to understand God's plan of redemption while discovering daily and practically your part in it.
Hey guys, welcome back. Today we are looking at some pretty important passages in the overall narrative of Scripture. They're probably up there with super meaningful passages, things that you should know, things you should be aware of. We're going to be looking at 2 Samuel 7 and 1Chronicles 17. Both of them sound almost exactly the same. It's just like a recounting. We've talked about how the chronicler is coming back after the exile and is helping the people recapture their history. So you can see that 1Chronicles 17 is very similar to 2 Samuel 7. But one of the things we can take from 2 Samuel 7 and 1Chronicles 17 is this messianic prophecy, this messianic promise that David's line will be established forever, that a son will come from David who will be king forever. And the language used in both of these chapters actually says, God is saying, I will be to him a father, and he shall be to me a son. The writer of Hebrews is going to say in Hebrews chapter 1, verse 5, that Jesus is in fact the Son of God, and he's going to refer to these verses in 2 Samuel and 1 Chronicles to prove that. Paul, when he writes his letters to the churches, in Romans 1:3, he actually talks about how Jesus was a descendant of David, which means Paul is referring back to these chapters to make the case for Jesus as the Messiah. So these are very, very important chapters as we travel through basically this 1 year journey of going through the Bible. Yesterday, we looked at Psalm 100, Psalm 101, and Psalm 132, and I talked about how you can see that we've clearly turned from David looking forward to be king to now David is fully and completely king. The Psalms that we looked at were, one of them was him kind of writing about what he wanted to be like as a king. And then Psalm 132 is actually celebrating the fact that all nations would be blessed because of his kingship. And so this developing theme of David as a powerful king who will basically impact the entire world for all ages is very important. And we're seeing here in 2 Samuel 7 and 1 Chronicles 17 that God is actually putting some legs to these promises. So basically what happens in the chapters, and I do encourage you to read it for yourself or stick around and listen to it. Basically what's going to happen in the chapters is that David gets really excited about the fact that he has been established as king. He's living in his palace basically. And he says, oh my goodness, like God doesn't have a house to live in. And so David talks to Nathan about building a house for God. And it seems like it's fine, but then that night Nathan has like a vision from God, and God tells him, like, I don't need a house to live in. I'm very happy moving around with my people in this tent, in this tabernacle. But quickly, God shuts down the idea of David building him a house, and he talks about how he is going to build David a house. And so you get this feeling that you go from talking about a literal physical house for God into God talking about like a rule and a reign and a dynasty of David, not a house at all. And so here, if you think about how God handled Saul, God was not super gracious with Saul because Saul was not turned toward God. So God judged him very quickly and ended his kingdom very quickly. Here, God is saying that David's kingdom will never end, and it will be established forever. There are parts of these chapters that apply specifically to Solomon. Part of the chapter talks about how David's son will end up building a house for God. Later on, we find out that David shed too much blood. He killed too many people, and so God didn't want him to build a temple. Here, we hear that God is saying that David's son will build a house for God at some point. But then God kind of like broadens everything and promises that he'll be a king forever. He'll be like a son to God himself. So what's interesting is that as we deal with the two different sources, 2 Samuel, the people would have had that at least close to when David was king or shortly after. Chronicles would have come much later. And so the people that are reading 2 Samuel would have understood that David has now been established as king. His family will reign in the kingdom for a long time. And his family did reign over the kingdom of at least Judah for at least 400 years before God judged them and carried them into exile. And so in 2 Samuel, you get this kind of celebration of Israel being at peace, no more war, no more enemies coming against David and his offspring and his descendants. Basically, like David has been established. But what you're going to see in Chronicles is that the people have seen David's people fail and fall. The people have seen that Solomon actually was not a great king at the end of his life. And so Chronicles is written from the perspective of, this is kind of confusing because David's reign did end and Solomon was judged. And while there were kings after David, they were not very great and they were not honoring to God. And so what's going to develop in the time of the exile is that the prophets are going to start to say that a shoot will come up out of the stump of Jesse. Basically, the prophets would have understood that David's kingdom was not super great in the exile. It was basically destroyed. But they started to talk about how God would raise up a new king from this destroyed line of kings, and he would keep his promise, and a deliverer would come. And so this idea of Messiah is very closely tied to the covenant with David that is established in these chapters. And the chronicler, as he's writing and preparing the people to enter back into worship, would have wanted the people to be very aware of the line of David, the kingdom established under David, so that they could get back to the heart of following God like David's kingdom did. A lot of people think actually 1 Chronicles 17 is kind of like the central pinnacle of everything they're trying to write about in Chronicles, because all the worship, the rule, the authority, it's all going to be rooted in David's kingdom, and that is going to be a major part of having the people understand who God is coming out of this period of judgment and being far from God and being away from the temple. So the chronicler is very concerned about establishing right and proper worship for the people, kind of giving them a new history. We've talked about this before. And so this line of David language is going to be really important. And then later on, when we get into the New Testament, this line of David language is going to be very important because Jesus is in fact a descendant of David, which makes him available to be under this covenant. And so the fact that God's son, Jesus, is a descendant of David actually ties back into these two chapters. It is part of the reason we can have confidence that Jesus is who he said he is. And God did, in fact, cause him to be the King of all kings, the Lord of all lords, and the name of all names, because God's kingdom shall have no end, and Jesus is still reigning as king. So these are interesting chapters. Like I said, I invite you to go back and read them for yourselves. But they're very critical chapters for us and our understanding of who Jesus is. And how this whole idea of God's covenant has been established. So if you zoom out and you think about all the things we've been reading and talking about since January, God shows up to Abraham out in the field. Abraham is a nobody. And God says, hey, I'm going to give you a son. Not only that, I'm going to give you tons of descendants. They're going to be more than the sand on the seashore or the stars in the sky, which was insane to Abraham because he was an old man with an old wife and had no way of having kids. And so Isaac is miraculously born. They are becoming like this entire tribe and nation under Jacob. They are cared for in Egypt under Joseph. They are delivered from slavery under Moses. And now here they are finally under the kingship of David, enjoying kind of like peace and prosperity. And it is here that God makes a covenant with David saying, your offspring will be a king forever. Your dynasty will reign forever. It's kind of a continuation of that promise to Abraham. That all of us benefit because Jesus is the Son of God. He is in the line of David. He is in the line of Abraham. And by him, all nations will be blessed. So it's an important text today. Go back and read it. Check it out. As far as the your part, I think just tracking the story from beginning to end, kind of like I just did, it is incredible to see how faithful God has been to his people up until this point. God has not turned away completely. He continues to remember his promises. He continues to provide for his people. You can see him giving correction when correction is due, but you can also see him giving blessing and provision when his people are obedient. And because David is obedient, God is rewarding his obedience and blessing him with a dynasty that will last forever, that we benefit from continually today. I think to be super tangible, I think it's really important for us every day to remember the fact that God loves us in a significant way. He cares for us in a significant way. And so if you're in a season of coming under, correction from God, if you feel like God has been putting tough things in your path, pay attention to that. When God disciplines us, we want to, be thankful that he cares for us and he's putting us in the right way. Pay attention to that. Turn from whatever is causing you to get off track and focus on the Lord. But also, if the Lord is providing for you and blessing you, be thankful for that, knowing that he is a God who loves to do that and has continued to do that throughout generations. So tomorrow we'll be looking at some of the Psalms again. And so we'll be back then. See you later. Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplанyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.